As we've mentioned already, the playlist is where you'll arrange your patterns, thus forming songs. The playlist can be viewed by pressing F5 or by using the shortcut toolbar. You can also access it in the View menu item. So once we have the playlist open, you'll see that it looks similar to the piano roll in that it's a gridded area with an upper and lower panel, as well as tools, and you can left-click to insert blocks of data. The difference is that instead of inserting notes, you're inserting patterns. To play something in the playlist, you have to make sure you have changed the setting to song mode. When you press play now, you'll see that the timeline will scroll from left to right. If you have the playback set to pattern mode and press play, you'll see that nothing moves on the playlist. This is because the playlist is technically the song, and the patterns are the loops used in the playlist. You can think of the playlist just like an MP3 player playlist, or a playlist on a media player on your computer. If you had a bunch of songs you wanted in a specific order because you know that they would sound good together, you would create a playlist. Well, in FL Studio, you create patterns that would sound good together, then organize them with the playlist. Now, you insert data the same way as the piano roll, by left-clicking, but the upper and lower panels offer us different options. The lower panel is where you insert pattern blocks. Basically, these are just a graphical representation of the pattern. They show you no data about what the pattern contains or what channels it's using. Nothing. All you see is a block that represents the length of the pattern. This is the old way of using the playlist. I say old way because with recent versions of FL Studio, we now have the ability to use pattern clips, which work much like audio and automation clips. So I don't get ahead of myself, the pattern blocks are the same as pattern clips, but the way they are displayed and the way that you edit them is differently. There's actually a separate video on pattern clips, so you may want to check that out and come back, but for now, you can see how to insert one by left-clicking. So it's fairly straightforward how this works. You can insert patterns to play in a sequence. The list in the bottom panel shows the pattern numbers. To rename a pattern, you can right-click it and choose Rename or press F2 with the pattern name selected. It's a good idea to get into the habit of naming your patterns, as you can lose track of what's what real quick. One thing I want to point out is pattern number 9. Pattern 9 is the main automation track. You'll see that anytime you start a project, pattern 9 will already have a pattern block on it. This is the default main automation track, but as you'll see when we discuss automation and automation clips, there isn't much need for this anymore. It used to be that you would record your automation on a track and then it would be inserted as a pattern block, so pattern 9 became the default to keep your automation on. But with the addition of automation clips, there isn't any real need for this to remain the main automation track, so you can use it now as a regular track. Just remember that when you begin a project, pattern 9 will still have the block already inserted, so if you aren't going to use it for automation, just delete it and use pattern 9 just like you would any other track. Now, when inserting pattern blocks in the lower part of the screen, it works the same way as the piano roll. Left-click to add, right-click to delete, left-click and drag to move left or right. But you can't move the pattern blocks up or down. You also have a zoom level control in the top right-hand corner, where you can zoom horizontally and vertically. We have some tools in the top left-hand corner as well. There's the pencil, paint, and delete tools, which work just like in the piano roll. We have a slip edit tool, which we'll discuss in a later tutorial. When working with pattern blocks, the slice tool is not something I would recommend using here. Again, in light of the pattern clips and automation clips, it's usually easier to use other editing techniques. The slice tool, when used on pattern blocks, will simply slice the pattern and insert a new pattern with the second half of the slice. This can lead to confusion as you move along in your project. We'll take a look at slicing with automation and pattern clips in a bit. We also have the select, zoom, and playback scrub tools, and then the snap selection. Snap selection works the same way in the playlist as it does in the piano roll. You can either select a setting that meets your needs or select none to freely move without snapping to any particular time. There's also the option to loop playback to a certain point after the song finishes. We can right-click at the top of the timeline to select the loop back point. Once the song finishes the last bar, playback will automatically begin again from the point that this playback icon is set at. This is great for doing live work or trying out different changes to see how one piece transcends into another. Keep in mind that this feature will not render on the final file and is only active during playback until you start the song over again manually. Now, we have some options in the top left-hand corner for working with pattern, automation, and audio clips, which we'll look at in their own tutorials. The last bit of info to cover are the options here in the top left-hand corner menu. Again, we have our editing options. All of these work the same as before, with copying, pasting, moving, and selecting. But at the bottom, we have an option to merge clips. This will merge all of the clips you have selected and then creates a pattern clip and inserts it into the timeline. This also creates a new pattern for the merged clips and inserts it into your patterns list. The Create Pattern Clip option will simply create a pattern clip of what's selected. The Tools menu gives us the Quick Quantize function, which again will quantize the data to the settings in the snap selector. The Pattern item gives us options for renaming, changing colors, opening in the browser, inserting, cloning, and deleting, as well as moving up and down. The Flatten Selection item is similar to the Merge option, which we also see here. The Flatten option will take any pattern blocks within the horizontal line and turn them into one single long pattern. Split by channel works if you have different channels of MIDI data on a pattern, splitting the data into different patterns while preserving any automation or property data. In the View item, we have options for some effects for the clips in the timeline. If you deselect Flat, the clips that you insert will have a more three-dimensional appearance. If you choose the Glass effect, they will have a bit of highlighting at the top and bottom to simulate a glassy shine. Here, we can panel swap channels. The Zoom item will give us some magnification options. Here's another great feature in FL Studio, the Live mode. Now, Live mode is meant to be used for exactly that, playing live. When you activate Live mode, you'll notice that some arrows appear next to your patterns. The way Live mode works is this. You make sure that you're in song mode and you press play. The position indicator will begin scrolling at whatever tempo you have it set on. It will continue to scroll on and on. To play a pattern, left-click the arrow beside the pattern that you want to play. This pattern should begin playback and will continue to loop. You can then do this with any other patterns that you have, thus basically giving you the ability to add or delete loops from your song on the fly without having to add or delete pattern bars or clips. You can turn loops off by left-clicking the arrow icon again. Another way to use this mode is with one-shots. A one-shot is a sound that is to be played only one time. Let's say that you have a sound effect or a short sample that you want to throw in, but you don't want it to be looped. You can right-click the pattern that has the sound effect sample on it, and it will change from an arrow into a 1. When you left-click the 1 symbol, it will light up, indicating that it's active. Once the pattern plays, it will automatically de-highlight and go back to being inactive until you left-click it again. Now, I'm sure that you can see the possibilities here for playing live at your own gigs. Whoever said that you needed turntables to be a live DJ has never used FL Studio. You can even press record while in live mode and record your song as you figure it out, and then edit it later if you want to change anything. This is also a great idea if you're doing a live set and you'd like to burn copies for people later. If you're using a MIDI keyboard controller, you can take a look at the help file for the MIDI settings to set up your keyboard to control what's playing in live mode from your keyboard. The other options that we have here are for adding markers, centering, which we discussed in the piano roll video, and detaching for use in another monitor. Now, with markers, you can either select Add Marker from this menu, or simply right-click below the timeline at the place that you would like to add the marker and choose either Add Marker, or if you already have one, to delete or rename. Markers can be very helpful in complex projects to remind you where each piece begins and ends. So that about wraps up the basics for the playlist. There is some more detailed information for working with the 3 newer types of data, those being audio, pattern, and automation clips, but I wanted to dedicate a separate tutorial for each one of those so as not to confuse anyone with too much information. The pattern blocks have been the only real way to use the playlist up until version 7 of FL Studio, so the pattern clips are a relatively new addition, and I want to keep them separate from the pattern blocks. We'll cover the usage of the 3 different types of clips in a future video, So for now, just remember that you can use pattern blocks to add patterns to the playlist. Make sure that you're in song mode. Make sure that your patterns are quantized, and then press play, and I will see you in the next video.